It usually happens right around 3 in the morning. The house is completely quiet. The street outside is dark. You are deep in that heavy kind of sleep that only comes when you are completely exhausted. And then out of nowhere, it hits you. It starts as a strange flutter just behind your knee or down by your ankle, and before you even have the chance to wake up properly, the entire muscle in your calf locks up solid as a piece of iron. The pain is so sharp and so sudden that your eyes snap open and you have to bite the inside of your cheek just to keep from shouting out loud and waking up everyone in the house. Your toes curl downward all on their own. You reach down to grab your leg, and the muscle underneath your skin feels like a twisted steel cable that is about to snap under the tension. You throw the blankets off, you swing your legs over the side of the bed, you plant your bare feet on the cold hardwood floor, and you try to stand up to force that locked muscle to stretch back out, but your leg refuses to hold your weight. You end up leaning hard against the nightstand, breathing heavy, waiting for the knot to slowly release its grip. When it finally does, maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, you crawl back into bed exhausted. But the real problem is the next morning. You wake up, you put your feet on the floor, and that calf muscle feels like it was hit with a heavy wooden mallet. There is a deep, lingering soreness that changes the way you walk down the hallway to get your coffee. You favor that leg. You take the stairs a little slower. You feel a quiet, heavy weakness in your lower half that you try your best to ignore. For a long time, I just accepted that this was part of the deal. I thought waking up in the middle of the night with leg cramps and walking around the next day with sore, weak legs was just the price of admission for getting older. I spent over 30 years working in a distribution warehouse right here in Knoxville. I spent 3 decades walking on solid concrete floors, climbing up and down the metal stairs of loading docks, carrying boxes, pushing heavy carts, and using my legs as the primary shock absorbers for my entire life. When you work a job like that, your legs are your livelihood. You do not think about them. You just expect them to work. You expect them to carry whatever weight you pick up, and for a long time they do. But after I retired, things started to shift. The constant movement stopped. The heavy lifting stopped. I started spending more time sitting in my armchair reading or watching television. And that was when the night cramps started hitting me with a brutal consistency. It was not just the pain in the dark that bothered me. It was what those cramps were leaving behind. I started noticing that my legs were looking thinner. The denim of my jeans was hanging a little looser around my thighs. Getting up from a deep chair required a slight push with my hands on the armrests, a movement I had never needed before. My balance felt just a fraction of a second slower to react when I stepped on an uneven piece of ground out in the yard. I was losing the very foundation that had carried me through my entire life, and the cramps were the alarm bell ringing in the middle of the night to tell me that something was going wrong down there. I did not want to admit it. Most men from my generation would rather swallow broken glass than admit their bodies are losing ground. We just push through the pain, ignore the weakness, and pretend everything is fine until the day something gives out and we end up in a hospital bed. I was heading exactly down that path of stubborn denial. But my daughter Megan is an occupational therapist. She spends her entire week working with folks our age who have lost their mobility. Folks who ignored the warning signs until they took a bad fall and lost their independence entirely. She came over to the house one Sunday afternoon for dinner. I was walking from the kitchen to the dining room carrying a heavy platter of roasted chicken, and I had a slight limp from a terrible cramp I had fought off the night before. I tried to hide it, but Megan catches everything. She pulled out a chair, sat me down, and looked right at me. She did not give me a lecture. She just told me what she sees at her clinic every single day. She explained that night cramps in older adults are rarely just a simple lack of water. She told me that for folks our age, chronic leg cramping is often deeply connected to the progressive loss of muscle mass and the deterioration of nerve signaling in the lower body. She told me about a study she had just read for her work. It tracked a large group of men and women over the age of 65. The numbers in that paper stayed in my mind for weeks. It showed that seniors who suffered from frequent severe lower body cramping also demonstrated a roughly 40% higher rate of accelerated muscle degradation compared to those who did not cramp. The cramps were not the disease. The cramps were a desperate signal that the muscles were starving, that the mineral balance was completely broken, and that the fibers were shrinking and misfiring because they did not have what they needed to function properly. Sitting there at that table, listening to my daughter explain the mechanics of what was happening inside my own body, I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. I realized that if I did not fix this, the cramps were just the beginning. The weakness would spread. The stairs would become a mountain. The trips out to the driveway to work on my truck would stop. The ability to chase my 4 grandkids around the backyard would disappear. I realized that my independence was tied directly to the strength of my legs, and my legs were quietly failing me. So I decided to stop ignoring the alarm bell and start figuring out how to put out the fire. I started reading. I started asking questions. I started paying very close attention to what I was putting into my body every single day. And what I discovered after a lot of trial and error was that I did not need a cabinet full of expensive pills or some complicated chemical supplement routine. I needed to change the building blocks I was feeding my muscles. I tracked down exactly 3 specific foods. 3 things that I started eating consistently that completely changed the landscape of my lower body. These 3 foods stopped the misfiring nerves, rebuilt the frayed fibers, and gave my legs their power back. I am going to walk you through exactly what these 3 foods are, why they work, and how they changed my life. And I will tell you right now, the 3rd food on this list is something that goes against almost every piece of popular diet advice we have been sold over the last 20 years. But it was the exact fuel my legs were begging for. Let us talk about the first change I had to make. For years, whenever I got a cramp, the only advice anybody ever gave me was to drink more water. They said cramps were just dehydration. So I would drink massive glasses of plain tap water before bed. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my stomach sloshing full of water, having to go to the bathroom twice, and my calf would still lock up on me on the way down the hall. I was doing exactly what I thought was right, and it was not working at all. The problem was that I was thinking about my muscles like dry sponges that just needed to be wet. I was missing the entire electrical system. Your muscles do not just contract and relax on their own. They require an electrical signal from your nervous system, and that signal is carried by minerals, specifically magnesium. Magnesium is the chemical switch that tells a contracted muscle fiber to finally let go and relax. When you do not have enough magnesium in your system, the switch gets stuck in the on position. The nerve keeps firing, the muscle stays locked tight, and you end up standing on a cold floor in agony. And what nobody tells you is that as we age, our bodies become terrible at absorbing and holding on to magnesium. Plus, the more plain water I was drinking, the more I was actually flushing those essential minerals right out of my system. I was making the electrical short circuit worse. Once I understood the electrical problem, I stopped drowning myself in plain water and went looking for the right kind of fuel. That is when I found the first food on my list: raw, unsalted pumpkin seeds. It sounds almost too simple to be true, but these little green seeds are absolute powerhouses of natural, bioavailable magnesium. They also carry a heavy dose of zinc, which helps reduce the inflammation that lingers in the muscle belly after a bad cramp. I started keeping a glass jar of them right on the kitchen counter. Every afternoon around 2 o'clock, when I would normally be looking for a mindless snack, I would grab a small handful of those pumpkin seeds. I did not eat a pound of them, just a small handful, maybe a quarter of a cup, chewed up thoroughly. The difference was not instantaneous. It did not happen overnight, but after about 3 weeks of eating them every single day, I noticed a shift. The electrical storm in my legs started to calm down. The flutters behind my knees disappeared. The deep, violent night cramps slowly faded into occasional mild tightness, and then they stopped completely. I remember talking to an old buddy of mine named Tom down at the local hardware store. Tom is 71, spent his whole life as a roofer, And he told me he was thinking about selling his two-story house because he was terrified of climbing the stairs at night after his legs cramped up. He was drinking gallons of water and taking weird herbal remedies that did absolutely nothing. I told him about the electrical switch. I told him about the magnesium. I told him to buy a bag of pumpkin seeds and keep them in his truck. I saw him a month later in the lumber aisle, and the look on his face said everything. He grabbed my shoulder and told me he had slept straight through the night for the first time in 5 years. The switch had finally flipped off. The muscle was finally allowed to rest. But fixing the electrical signal was only the first part of the battle. Stopping the cramps did not automatically bring back the strength that I had already lost. My legs still felt heavy. They still felt thin. I still had that moment of hesitation before stepping up onto a high curb. I needed to rebuild the physical structure of the muscle itself, and that meant looking very closely at how I was starting my day. For decades, my morning routine was black coffee and 2 pieces of dry toast. Maybe a bowl of oat cereal if I was feeling hungry. In the late 80s and 90s, we were all told that fat was the ultimate enemy. We were told to eat low-fat everything, cut the calories, and stick to dry, empty carbohydrates for breakfast. I carried that habit right into my 70s, completely unaware that I was systematically starving my muscles of the exact raw materials they needed to rebuild themselves. Muscles do not just stay strong on their own. Every time you walk, every time you climb a stair, you create microscopic tears in the muscle tissue. When you are 20, your body repairs those tears effortlessly. When you are over 60, your body demands a massive amount of high-quality protein and calcium to perform that exact same repair job. If you do not give your body those materials, the muscle tears do not get repaired. They just slowly waste away. This realization led me to the second food that changed my daily routine: full-fat plain Greek yogurt. I had to completely abandon the old fear of dietary fat and the habit of eating empty morning carbs. I am not talking about the sugary, flavored yogurts that come in little plastic cups with fruit jam on the bottom. Those are basically desserts dressed up as health food. I am talking about the thick, tart, plain Greek yogurt made with whole milk. It is dense, it is heavy, and it is loaded with exactly what an aging leg muscle desperately needs. First, it provides a massive hit of high-quality, easily digestible protein right at the start of the day. Megan showed me a study tracking muscle synthesis in older adults, and it proved that we need almost double the amount of amino acids in a single meal to trigger muscle growth compared to younger folks. That thick yogurt delivers those amino acids efficiently. Second, it delivers bioavailable calcium. We always hear about calcium for our bones, but calcium is actually the necessary partner to magnesium in the muscle contraction process. Magnesium tells the muscle to relax, but calcium tells the muscle to contract with power and force. You need both to have a leg that responds when you demand it to move. I started eating a solid bowl of that plain, whole milk Greek yogurt every single morning. I would throw in a few berries for taste, maybe a sprinkle of those pumpkin seeds on top to hit both targets at once. The texture took a few days to get used to, but the results in my body were undeniable. I started feeling a density return to my thighs. That hollow, weak feeling I used to get around mid-morning completely vanished. The soreness that used to linger for 2 days after doing yard work started clearing up by the next morning. My son Derek runs a commercial HVAC business here in town. He employs a lot of guys my age who have been crawling around in ductwork and hauling compressors for 30 years. Derek is always telling me how he watches his older guys lose their leg drive. They start struggling to get up from their knees. They start pulling themselves up with their arms instead of pushing off with their legs. One of his senior technicians, a guy named Carl, who is 68, was complaining about constant leg fatigue and weakness. Derek knew Carl lived on black coffee and gas station pastries. He told Carl what I was doing with the heavy yogurt in the mornings. Carl thought it sounded ridiculous, but he was hurting enough to try it. 6 weeks later, Carl told Derek that the burning sensation in his thighs when carrying his tool bag up a flight of stairs was practically gone. He was finally giving his body the bricks and mortar it needed to repair the damage from the day before. He stopped starving his own foundation. Now, I want to pause here for a second before I tell you about the last food on my list. If you start fixing the electrical signals with the right magnesium, and you start giving your body the heavy protein it needs to rebuild the muscle fibers, you are going to see a massive improvement in how your legs feel and operate. You will sleep better. You will stand up easier. But there is a third element. An element that provides the deep, sustained fuel that prevents the muscles from fatiguing and giving out when you actually need to use them. This third food is the one that really brought the power back to my legs, and it is the one that goes against the grain of what a lot of people think is healthy for seniors. For the last 10 years or so, it seems like everyone has become terrified of carbohydrates. You read magazines, you watch television programs, and they all tell you that if you are older and you are not running marathons, you need to cut out all the carbs because they will just turn into belly fat. I fell right into that trap. I started eating salads for dinner. I pushed the potatoes off my plate. I tried to live on lean chicken breasts and steamed broccoli. I thought I was being incredibly disciplined and healthy, but what nobody explained to me is how a muscle actually stores its energy. Muscles run on a stored form of carbohydrate called glycogen. It is the fuel in the gas tank. When you strip all the complex carbohydrates out of your diet, you are draining the gas tank completely dry. When an aging muscle has no glycogen stored inside it, it fatigues rapidly. And a rapidly fatiguing muscle is incredibly prone to spasming, cramping, and giving out under pressure. On top of that, cutting out complex carbs usually means you are drastically cutting your potassium intake. Potassium is the mineral that balances the fluid inside and outside of your cells. Without enough potassium, your muscles dry out from the inside, making them tight, brittle, and weak. That is when I introduced the third food back into my life: baked sweet potatoes eaten with the skin entirely on. I am not talking about a sweet potato casserole covered in brown sugar and marshmallows at Thanksgiving. I'm talking about a plain scrubbed, slow-baked sweet potato. Linda, my wife, is the one who actually pushed me on this. She is a very practical woman who does not fall for passing diet fads. She was reading one of her health newsletters that detailed a clinical observation of older adults suffering from chronic muscle fatigue. The observation showed that participants who consumed natural, potassium-rich, complex carbohydrates saw a dramatic increase in their lower body endurance and a significant drop in exercise-induced cramping. The potassium from a real food source, combined with the slow-burning carbohydrate energy, acted like a deep sustaining charge to the muscle battery. I started having a baked sweet potato with my dinner at least 3 or 4 nights a week. I would scrub it clean, poke a few holes in it, bake it until it was completely soft, and eat the whole thing, skin and all. The skin is where a massive amount of the potassium and the fiber is hidden. The change in my physical stamina was the most surprising part of this entire journey. I have a set of thick rubber resistance bands rigged up out in my garage. I use them to do slow squats and leg presses to try and keep my joints moving. Before I brought the sweet potatoes back into my diet, my legs would start shaking violently after just a few minutes of using those bands. The muscle belly would just scream for oxygen and fuel, and I would have to quit. But once I started filling the glycogen tanks back up with the sweet potatoes, that shaking stopped. I could push through the movements with a steady, controlled power. The heavy, dead feeling in my legs when I walked up the driveway with a bag of groceries was replaced by a solid, reliable push. I was no longer driving a truck with an empty gas tank. I had given my legs their primary fuel source back, and they responded by carrying me with confidence again. I shared this with a neighbor of mine, a retired school teacher named Henry, who is 75. Henry loves to work in his garden, but he was complaining that his legs felt like jelly after just 20 minutes of kneeling and standing. He was eating a strict low-carb diet because someone told him it was good for his heart. I told him to bake a sweet potato. I told him his legs were just starving for fuel. He added them back into his evening meals, and a few weeks later, I saw him out in his garden pulling weeds for an hour straight without having to sit down and rest his knees. He gave his body the energy it was begging for. When you put these 3 things together, the transformation is not some kind of overnight miracle. It needs the magnesium to fix the electrical shorts. It needs the heavy protein to rebuild the torn fibers. It needs the complex potassium-rich carbohydrates to keep the gas tank full. Do not try to change your entire life all at once. That never works. Just pick one thing tomorrow. Go to the grocery store and buy a small bag of raw pumpkin seeds. Or pick up a tub of plain whole milk Greek yogurt. Or buy a bag of sweet potatoes and throw one in the oven for dinner. Start giving your foundation the respect and the fuel it deserves. Your independence begins and ends with the strength of your legs. If your legs go, your freedom goes right along with them. Do not wait until standing up feels like a problem you cannot solve. Protect what you have and rebuild what you have lost. I'm going to head out to the garage now to sharpen the blades on my lawnmower. I appreciate you sitting here and letting me share this with you. Start making the changes today. I will be right here when you are ready to talk again.